here, it is not enough for the negative team to simply just assert, to win today's debate, to say that certain religious, faith-based rehabilitation is effective to certain individuals. They need to explain and justify why it is legitimate for a state, a government, a secular entity to utilize a particular value set and that particular practice as a tool of a government benefit, ladies and gentlemen. So it might be the case that some people might find, like, repent, or some people might be able to rehabilitate by reading like extremely radical literature such as Mein Kampf. But that is not a legitimate reason to say that states should simply allow that just because that person feels like it. So before I move on to my substantive, I have a number of responses to the previous speakers. So first, on the issue of harm and the benefit, the potential benefit of these faith-based rehabilitation. Now, what we heard from the previous speaker was trying to take a very shallow stance. They said that they're not going to teach these extremely antisocial, potentially controversial segment of the religion. Now, number one, how do you select, and how will a government, a secular entity, will be able to legitimately select and distinguish between which dogma or religion is antisocial or potentially controversial, or it is beneficial for rehabilitation? How about evangelism? That can be potentially controversial. Are they going to allow that or not? How about Mormonism? How about Soka Gakkai in Japan? It could be potentially controversial. Some countries recognize it as a cult. So are they going to recognize those entities as a legitimate form of rehabilitation or not? It is simply impossible. It is politically and religiously impossible for a secular government entity to objectively explain why this religion is okay for rehabilitation and why this is not. Second of all, when I asked the point of information, whether they were going to allow, edit the Quran, for example, edit certain misogynistic segment out of the Quran, he explicitly mentioned that they won't, and he said something else, but I didn't really understand. So if you're going to allow, for example, a Islamic faith-based rehabilitation, if you're going to allow Quran to exist in prison in the form of rehabilitation, there are certain dogmas and segments within the Quran which can be interpreted as a justification for misogyny. There is a specific dogma and a specific line within the Quran which justifies a murder of those who opt out from Muslim, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the kind of idea, those are the kind of value set that these particular religious doctrine necessary to teach. So how are they going to cope with it? If they're going to edit that segment out, if they're going to intentionally not teach those portions, then that is going to be extremely anti-religious. They will be seen as extremely anti-religious from the Muslim community, and they will not cooperate with the prison system and allow such edited version of their religion to be taught in that particular prison system. Then his substantive was it's good to have a greater meaning, a sense of greater meaning necessarily allows that person to rehabilitate. Now, one, religion is not a unique avenue, a unique method to allow people to have a sense of greater meaning, love with your love and connection, a sense of love and connection with their community, just simple common humanity. Just being a nice person does not require religion as a premise for that to happen. But second of all, this is where my substantive come in, is that you cannot objectively and quantitatively prove whether that person is having or has achieved a greater meaning, ladies and gentlemen. And that is a fundamental problem of religion. Not yet. Moving to my first substantive, which is about exploitation. We think that prison is an extremely inappropriate place to allow religious proselytization to occur because you have a power imbalance between the prison guard or the prison system and the inmate. And in order for that prisoner to be evaluated as a good inmate, in order to get released earlier, he or she must obey with the prison system and do whatever the prison system tells him to do. So what the likelihood is in which an inmate is pressured or in certain cases forced to believe in a specific religion that he does not feel like he wants to do so. For example, it's not really unrealistic to imagine in a rural conservative Christian state such as Wyoming or Mississippi, you have a Muslim prisoner. He cannot ask for a Muslim imam for rehabilitation because the only rehabilitation program that they have is a Christian one. And in order for him to get released earlier, he feels pressured that he must go and under that Christian faith rehabilitation, even though he's a Muslim. We think that's extremely exploitative and unfair to that person. Yes.
It seems like you are just talking about the general argumentation about how prison utilizes power imbalance, which is not mutually exclusive on either side of the house. Or are you saying that only on your side of the house somehow prison can be banned only
Yes.
on your side.
This is the important argument that I'm going to explain finally. On the issue of accountability, what's the difference between religious rehabilitation and secular rehabilitation? Now, we think that since rehabilitation program is funded by the state, which means it is funded by taxpayer money, state must be accountable to explain the legitimacy of faith-based rehabilitation. We think there are two problems when you allow faith-based rehabilitation in state-run prison. Number one, it would mean that a state has officially recognized that a particular religion has legitimate effectiveness in transforming people's behavior and repent that person's crime, which means that basically a state has recognized the effectiveness of a metaphysical ideology. It would mean that a state has officially authorized the effectiveness of things such as Christianity. That would completely oppose the idea of separation of state and church, because in reality, as my partner mentioned, prisons are likely to provide faith-based rehabilitation for not just thousands of religions existing in the world, but only based on providing rehabilitation based on the majority religion in which that prison geographically is located. So it would mean that state has favor a particular religion over other religion. But the second reason why this is problematic is because state cannot legitimately explain the effectiveness of religious rehabilitation. This is a direct comparative with secular program, which is scientifically and statistically proven, which is based on things such as statistic data and psychotherapy and those kind of things, which the state can prove and explain. If a particular prisoner has reached this level of psychotherapy rehabilitation, then the likelihood of that person reoffending is X% lower, statistically saying. So a government, when it comes to secular rehabilitation, state is more accountable because the state has a method of quantitatively and objectively explaining why they have released that prisoner or particular inmate earlier. But that doesn't apply to religion, because you cannot objectively see or check whether how devoted a Christian that person has become, and how a greater meaning that person has feeling. So this is extremely problematic. So what happens is that, for example, a prison released an ex-murderer earlier because that prison evaluated and thought that particular prisoner was now a good Christian and he will not reoffend. Well, what if that person reoffends? Now the problem is the state will not be able to be accountable because the state cannot objectively explain why they have released. And we think this is extremely problematic for a secular government to have those kind of problems, and for all of those reasons, we are extremely proud of it.